Joe Scarborough and Mika Brzezinski of Morning Joe have been caught up in a little bit of a scandal, a media discussion that was majorly prompted by them visiting Mar-a-Lago. And I showed you them addressing that when it originally happened, but here it was sort of reignited, and it led to a rant, I think you could call it, from Joe Scarborough, addressing a lot of the stuff that they hadn't been talking much about. And he admitted it's because they had asked corporate and they said, let's just stay quiet, and they respected that position. And so it's been strange because I've been waiting to hear them talk more about it, and they haven't really, even though a lot of stories have been coming out about them busy Mar-a-Lago. I'll remind you of that a little bit later, but it was reignited because of a piece from The Atlantic titled "The Sound of Fear on Air." It is an ominous sign that Morning Joe felt it had to apologize for something I said. And this is David Frum, who's a friend of the show Morning Joe. And to go through this, originally David Frum was on the show, and he said, if I can get this pulled up, this joke that then was later addressed by Mika Brzezinski. You'll see how this happens, leads to this article, and then the response to the fact that this happened on air prompts Scarborough and Brzezinski to circle back to the topic of them going to Mar-a-Lago. While you watch this, please do click the subscribe button. So here's David Frum on MSNBC, what led to this series of events.
National editor at the Financial Times, Ed Luce, Jonathan Lemire, Caddy K, Mike Barnacle are still with us. David, I'll start with you on this. What's your sense of where the Hegseth pick is headed here?
Well, just given what one sees on camera, if you're too drunk for Fox News, you're very, very drunk indeed. So that's alarming. In 1989, President George H.W. Bush.
And then it continues, right? A joke about how if you're too drunk at Fox News, then you're really drunk, talking about Pete Hegseth, and a really serious story there. And then if I can go from there to this, Mika Brzezinski, then they come back from break, and it's a little bit later, and she addresses that remark that he made.
To Ed Luce of the Financial Times, thank you very much. And before we go to break, a little bit earlier in this block, there was a comment made about Fox News in our coverage about Pete Hegseth and the growing number of allegations about his behavior over the years and possible addiction to alcohol or issues with alcohol. The comment was a little too flippant for this moment that we're in. We just want to make that comment as well. We want to make that clear. We have differences in coverage with Fox News, and that's a good debate that we should have often. But right now, I just want to say there's a lot of good people that work at Fox News who care about Pete Hegseth, and we'll want to leave it at that. Still ahead on Morning.
Okay, so that was then described by David Frum, take that for what you will, as the sound of fear on air. And it talks about how he made that joke, then Mika Brzezinski had to say that, and he said, she's right, of course, there are good people at Fox News, but if NBC's reporting based on interviews with 10 current or former Fox employees about Hegseth alcohol abuse is accurate, many of those same good people have failed to report publicly that their former colleague appointed to lead the armed forces of the United States was notorious in their own building for his drinking. That would be a startling and shameful shirking of responsibility on a matter of grave national importance. What's the appropriate language to call it out? Now, this part of it is less relevant to me, because if they felt the need to go, hey, we thought that joke was a little bit flippant, we want to note that. He made a joke. It was kind of a funny joke, but maybe you don't feel like that's appropriate. None of that matters. He didn't really think that was a huge issue, but he thinks it's indicative of the fear of retribution from Trump side of the visit to Mar-a-Lago story, which is that Joe Scarborough, Mika Brzezinski announced on the show, as we covered in a different segment, that they had visited Mar-a-Lago. Trump characterized that meeting as super cozy. I'm summarizing his language, but he talked about how great the meeting was, which for people who know Trump, understand him, we know is a concerning sign. If they're going to meet with him, which is not bad by itself, because you could use that as a chance to articulate your negative thoughts about him to him, or warn him about, if you go through with some of these horrible acts, we're going to be leading the charge in the media to call you out every single day over it. So be warned. You could use a meeting valuably with even horrible leaders. I think everyone gets that, hopefully. But it was that, did they go down there and sort of kiss his ass? Is that what this was? Because that would be two-faced. That would not align with the rhetoric on air, and that would be worthy of criticism. But because we don't have audio of the meeting, we don't know exactly what happened, and they were a little bit vague in what took place there. All we have is Trump's account, which we usually don't take his word at face value. It was tough to know exactly how I felt about it because we didn't have much information about the substance, and that's what mattered. Not did it happen, but what happened during the meeting and why were they doing that. And then we got some reporting that it was over a fear of retribution, which leads you to believe that this was about making nice with him or walking back some of what they've said. They very much dispute that that's why it took place. You'll hear some of that woven into the response to the David Frum part of this. So they go back on air this morning. I guess that was 2 days ago. Now this morning, they go back on air and say, David Frum released this Atlantic piece and we're not happy about it, and they address it for 20 minutes. I'll obviously skip around this as we go through it.
Sometime, a guy who he knows, he's been one of my heroes for years now, a great writer, David Frum. He writes for The Atlantic. David came on the show yesterday, and we're having a good conversation. But we were talking about the Fox News employees that actually talked to Courtney Kuby and other people at NBC News and said that he'd been drinking too much there. And it was devastating.
Concerned.
It was a devastating report. And David flippantly said, was joking, he said, if you're too drunk for Fox News, you're very, very drunk indeed. We went on with this segment. And just to let you know how things work here, I was asking Mika, should we address that or not? Because if somebody had said that about any news outlet, we'd usually say something about it to reference the entire network. So at the end, and I want to get the words right, Mika said this: the comment was a little too flippant for the moment we're in. We disagree with Fox News, but there's some good people over there. And we, of course,
a lot of worried about Pete Hegseth.
We're also, of course, talking about those people so worried at Fox News about America's national security that they were talking to an NBC News reporter
coming forward
saying Hegseth was not qualified. So Mika said after, the comment was a little too flippant for the moment we're in. We disagree with Fox News, but there's some good people over there, including, of course, those talking to NBC News about their concerns. This got turned into a column and a headline that said that, well, let's see, what was the headline? The sound of fear. Now, that wasn't the sound of fear. That was the sound of civility. And saying that Mika had apologized. Mika didn't apologize.
No,
She simply said, it was too flippant. Now, I would recommend that if we're at a stage where a comment like this causes a meltdown, and I saw George Conway, another guy we have on the show, and
who we love.
We love George, saying, read this article. It's going to make you very sad, but you must read it all. Oh, because of the fearful times we're in. Well, there's some problem with the times that we're in.
You can't.
Okay, so that's the first part. It gets much more heated as we go through. I want to say as a general principle, there's a couple more general things and then we can be more specific with these two. Number one, I don't like the culture of us eating each other alive constantly on this side, meaning the side that's opposed to Trump and that is calling out the dangers of him and then is generally pro-democracy and pro-decency and ideally pro-common sense policies. Where people are so quick to go, you're the enemy now. So in that sense, I appreciate that. I understand the stance that they're taking, which is that, oh my gosh, we got eaten alive for what we did. But again, we'll get to more specifics about them in a second. And then number two, I don't like, and I talked about this before, people conflating their meeting and how it could have been a sign of them trying to prevent retribution and kissing up to him, depending on the substance of the meeting, with it's bad to talk with or platform or address even the worst of the opposing side. And that's not logical. We got to do that. But it's, do you do it responsibly, as I keep saying? Now, as we get more specific with them, a lot of their coverage has just been sort of typical since that announcement, but we haven't had good stories that could really test if they're going to be as critical of Trump as they normally be, or are they going to walk it back a little bit? And so I really don't have a judgment for you yet in terms of is their coverage changing since that meeting. But if they did the meeting to gain information about Trump and will stay when justified just as critical of him, then that could be totally fine. The concern from a lot of people, which is why they've gotten so much criticism and lost so much viewership, is that, which one of the reports was this, they were afraid of his retribution, and so it really was a chance to make nice. And if you believe that Trump represents the horrific principles that I believe and people believed that Trump represents, then there would be no ambition to sort of, oh, we're going to compromise with you on our values. So they'll address that meeting a little bit more as we go along.
The sound of fear, the apology, none of that is true. But guess what? This is what's been going on now for several weeks. You know, we went down to talk to the president-elect. And people wrote articles that were just false. But you know what we did? We did the corporate thing. Corporate said, don't say anything. Just keep your head down. What did the Royals say? Never explain, never complain, whatever. We did that. We enjoyed our Thanksgiving. We're like, you know what? People are upset with some of our guests, some of our friends. Maybe we snuck up on them too fast. Maybe we should have given them more of a warning. Whatever, it's fine. But guess what? The main complaint was that we called Donald Trump's rhetoric fascist during the campaign. And then we went down to have an off-the-record comment with him. Guess who else does that?
Let me see. From the New York Times,
the New York
Washington
Times,
Post, the Wall Street. You know what? I even think folks from the Atlantic.
I think actually,
I think they might
probably
be doing that.
If they have a chance to talk on the background with the incoming president and president-elect, they would do it. In fact, as somebody wrote during this outrageously stupid, immature series of articles that lied time and time again about us, reporters said, well, I'd be fired if I had the opportunity to go in and talk to somebody who's the incoming president of the United States, and I didn't do it. Ask any journalist at the New York Times, the New York Post. And that's the funny thing. People at the Washington Post especially, hair on fire, media report, how dare they?
Yeah, so I think another criticism I have of how they've handled this, again, it's not meeting with Trump. If Mar-a-Lago called and said I could go sit down with him, I would take the opportunity to, and then use that time wisely. In my case, sort of as I told you before, trying to, in a way that maybe would hit his ears some type of way, articulate just how bad it's going to be even for him if he goes through on some of his worst intentions. He's surrounded by yes men. I'd like to tell him no to his face. That would be very satisfying. So it's all about what happened, but they didn't give much specifics. That's a part of the problem. If you're going to make this big announcement, a lot of times whenever journalists are having these meetings and are just sort of gathering information, they don't go make a big announcement that they had such a meeting. And the way they announced it did make it feel like we're turning a new page and we're going to now be buddies. And while we're all sitting and waiting to see exactly what Trump's going to do, and then we'll judge it as opposed to prejudging his presidency, even just with his picks, we can see what type of presidency he's creating. And it's not one that justifies us going, okay, everything fascistic we've heard him say and every group he's targeted and all of his bad record and all of that, we're just going to forget that and turn the page, and now we're going to be completely normal with him. But maybe they could have prevented some of the backlash. And I'm sure some of the backlash was hyperbolic, but they could have prevented some of it if they gave specifics about the meeting not being a cozy fest. Oh, unless it was. Well, then that would be something people are going to be nauseated by.
How dare they? At the same time that the Washington Post is doing the same thing, trying to speak to the president on background, trying to speak to people around the president. That's what reporters do. And by the way, guess what? That's what I've been doing for years. When I go speak to Middle East leaders on background, some who are not good people, guess what? I do it to get information and background to give it to you. I bet you didn't know, because I didn't tell you, because it was a background conversation. When I went to Élysée Palace last summer and I spoke to Macron for about an hour in his office about Ukraine.
Yeah, okay, he's going through that. I think anyone who's rational understands as a principle, and I'll get you the climax here in a second, we all agree you can meet with all sorts of terrible people and get value out of it. And that's not, I don't think, where most people are coming from. But instead, the only information we could get about the meeting was that it was potentially prompted by you being afraid of Trump's retribution, which means that the only way you're going to minimize that is to walk back the criticisms of him to him. Otherwise, how would meeting with him, if you're not kissing his rear end, how are you minimizing the chances of him implementing retribution? But it's such a scary time that we're even talking about this, because they may have made the wrong decision in response to their belief that Trump's going to inflict retribution on them, but they have good reason to believe he will. He's talked about the government coming down hard on MSNBC because of folks like them. And so that shouldn't be distracted from, right? This is an interesting saga, but much more important is that we live in an environment where the president is so bad that this would be a scandal, or the incoming president has openly threatened media outlets. That's super important that we keep our eye on the ball on. Let me play this.
Two things. You can do two things at the same time. You can say he had fascist rhetoric and still go in and talk to him.
Yeah.
You know why I do that? To get the read of the man. You know why I went in and talked to Macron? To get the read of the man at a crucial time in EU funding and NATO funding. Do you know why I went to leaders in the Middle East who were angry at the United States, and I sat there and I listened to them attacking me personally for 45 minutes because of U.S. policy? You know why I do that? To get the read of the leader, to get the read of where the country's going. So I can come back here and talk to you and let you know what the hell is going on.
With context and
give you context, insight, and background. You know everybody we have on the show that's a reporter? It's what they do every day. They speak on background.
Yeah, so, and I get that as a principle, and I get that as a reason to meet with bad leaders. I started my initial coverage, I remember, when this story broke weeks ago, with that caveat of, let's just all be clear, totally acceptable to meet with really bad people, to try to gain some information on them, about them, to read them, all that. It's just, they were really vague, and which I know it was off the record, so that's probably why, but they didn't push back against the perception, effectively enough at least, that this was some sort of rear end kissing sesh for them to try to prevent Trump from going after them, which means, wait, no, but in a time where retribution is being threatened is a time when we need brave people in the media more than ever. And they're saying that it doesn't represent what was being reported on, and that's not true. And so we can all just take that for what we will. Very interesting stuff, though. They've lost a lot of viewers, which is something else. And I do think let's just all have just a little bit of hesitancy, being so trigger happy, okay? Let's not eat each other alive. I think we need to be strong as a movement. Constantly going after each other isn't necessarily necessary. But you can tell me if you disagree in the comments and get the bonus show by clicking that join button below.